So they stole it. Why do you know where they took me? Though I want that. Can I have my iPad?
Okay, let's hope I've got all of that. If you read the EFF's court papers, they primarily add to ours by arguing that the support of the smaller parties in the Portfolio Committee and in Parliament was based on a deliberate deception. That the ANC had deliberately deceived the smaller parties into believing that they would be prepared to drop the 0.5% VAT increase when that was never their intention. And in fact, the EFF points to the fact that the minister had insisted that the 0.5% VAT increase continue in his replying affidavit last Thursday, and yet the smaller parties had voted for the fiscal framework in the Portfolio Committee and in Parliament on the express understanding that they believed the minister would reconsider it. And on that basis, the EFF argued that there was a clear deception which was an unlawful exercise of public power. That was the EFF's case. And I think it was a very important argument because it continues to expose how the ANC deals with its partners in whatever forum. Now, these weren't their partners in the Government of National Unity, or not entirely. Obviously, the PA was there, and the IFP and a couple of other parties also agreed to support the fiscal framework, and they are in the Government of National Unity, but also parties that are not in the Government of National Unity. And it's important that this level of deception, which happens repeatedly, is also exposed to the voting public of South Africa, because coalitions are based on a foundation of mutual trust. And the big problem is we have to operate in a very low trust environment. There's very low trust environment inside the ANC, but that also makes a trust environment between the ANC and its coalition partners very, very difficult to establish. And the EFF's papers make it very clear as to why there's a low trust environment, because people get deliberately duped and then take decisions on the basis of misinformation that then turns out not to be the case. And so that was an important contribution by the EFF to this particular case. We were arguing the constitutional arguments primarily. They were arguing the deliberate misinformation and misleading argument, and that being an unlawful exercise of public power. So those two arguments dovetailed well, and that is why they joined our case. Now, can Action South Africa lay claim to a victory? Well, they no doubt will try, and they will no doubt be helped by the ANC to do that sometime this morning, later on this morning, which is, I'm sure, the purpose of this press conference they're having, or at least one of the purposes. But then they will have to answer the question, why did all their discussions, and almost all of them were before last Thursday, why did that have absolutely no impact on the position that the minister laid before the court? That the VAT increase was going ahead, and that it would be in the rates bill, and that it would be effective from May the 1st. That is what the minister makes categorically clear last Thursday, after all his discussions had happened and after the misleading of the smaller parties had already happened in March before the vote on the fiscal framework. So it's going to be a very hard sell. And I'm sure journalists will ask some very pertinent questions around that claim. What are talks like in these meetings with the ANC? They're often surreal. I mean, they're often very cordial and very friendly and very polite and matter-of-fact and professional. The trouble is we're operating in a very low-trust environment. We've been given undertakings time and time again that have not materialized. And when I discuss that with some colleagues who have lots of experience of coalitions in Germany and in Denmark and in Holland and other places, they say to me that no coalition would survive in those contexts under the level of mistrust that inevitably has built up over the course of our negotiations and the course of this particular coalition government. So we have to always be very wary. Can we accept what the ANC is saying to us? The ANC is very, very wary never to write things down and never to get anything on paper, and certainly not to sign anything. And that is why you'll remember when we negotiated the statement of intent, there was a fight till after Judge Zondo had called for nominations for the president before we said we would vote for the president, because we said we would only vote if the statement of intent was signed by the duly authorized person in the form of the Secretary General of the ANC. They did sign it, but it still made very little difference. So that is the pure fact of the matter. There's a huge disconnect between what gets said in meetings and what gets done. That is the fact. And for us in the DA, who run very strictly in a high trust environment, because we have processes, we have the rule of our own laws and our own constitution, everyone can rely on each other sticking by those rules. That is what creates a high trust environment. And that is why the DA works. It's a completely novel thing for us to be in a relationship characterized by a low trust environment. And that is profoundly different from any other coalition circumstance anywhere else in the world, and makes predicting what's going to happen from one day to the next very difficult. And it also makes it very difficult to determine in the course of these meetings what we can take seriously and what the ANC will simply ignore when it suits it. Right, then, will we attend the meeting with the ANC tomorrow? I suppose we will. You know, we don't know what's going to come out of today's meeting. Anything can come out of today's meeting with the smaller parties. I mean, you know, I'm sure many of them would like to be in the coalition government. So let's see if the ANC is going to do something unilateral there. We never know what's going to happen. We never know what's going to happen. So this is the consequence of what I have just described as a low trust environment. We will assess the situation after the meeting has happened, and then we will go ahead. But normally we are open to having meetings. We prefer to tell the ANC exactly what we think of a situation, exactly where we stand in a situation, and we prefer to play open cards. And that is what we will usually intend to do. But I can't say we will definitely go tomorrow, because it also depends on what happens today and where we are with the negotiations around the settlement and where we are in relation to the coalition as a whole. The South African Institute of Race Relations poll that measured the DA as the biggest party in South Africa at a particular point in time. Let me stress that a poll is not a prediction, and we are used to fluctuations in the poll depending on the context and the environment. And yes, all South Africans have responded very positively to the DA's fight in this matter, and all thanks go to the voters for standing up and giving us the muscle and the voice that we needed to stop this VAT increase. So I think people are beginning to understand, and this is the crucial thing, that their vote really impacts on their life. And that if they want their life to improve, they need to vote for a party that fights for them, and the DA will fight for them at those critical moments. And once that perception runs deep in the South African population, people will be able to switch their vote without being rooted in the identity politics of the past, because the issues will become the issue and people will increasingly vote on the issues to improve their lives. So this has been a pivotal moment in South African politics, because it has revealed to voters why their vote makes such a difference to the way they live. Then, in the court case, the election is separate. Yeah. Okay. Can I just answer the question of a battle lost and a war won? I will come to that, Babala. I promise I'll come to that. Look, our battle in the GNU is to improve people's lives. And we especially want to improve the lives of the poor. That's what we want to do. And the most important thing for poor people is to get into a job. And so the critical thing is to grow the economy and to encourage investment. And every single thing we do in the GNU seeks to achieve that end, economic growth and jobs for the poor. And every fight we fight within that larger battle seeks to add to that outcome. So the last thing we want is for life to get more expensive for the poor while jobs are going down. That is why this fight was so crucial to win within the larger battle. So we do believe that we will win this fight when the settlement is finally concluded, but we only see this as a very small step in a much bigger battle. To grow the economy, to attract investment, to increase jobs, and to get many more South Africans working in dignified circumstances. Oh, Minister. Look, trouble is, if I say the minister should resign, he definitely won't. So that is the problem. Look, the minister let us know with very short time before the budget, it was about 12 days before the budget, that he was proposing a VAT increase and he wanted us to say yes. And we said, we will definitely not say yes. We will definitely say no. And he told us at the very last minute, and he didn't accept our response, and he didn't accept any of our offers on a spending review and how to cut expenditure and where it could be cut without affecting frontline services. And so now we've had to force him back through the courts. Now, this is a very important victory, but it shows you that in the political process, because the ANC has not yet accepted that they don't govern alone, we often hit a brick wall, because the ANC is used to governing in a situation where they say what has to happen and the rest of us have to go along with it. And that is what makes it very difficult to achieve out of the political process what we should achieve out of the political process in a normal coalition. So when we hit a brick wall in the political process, then we have to revert to the legal track. And the legal track was very clear and an open goal for us here. So what we couldn't succeed in the political process, we had to win through the legal process. Now, that alone should make a minister resign, because the minister says you don't negotiate a budget. I'm terribly sorry, but in a coalition, that's the first thing you negotiate is the budget. The very first thing you negotiate is the budget, because what is politics? Politics is about decisions of those elected into power as to how to spend the people's money and what priorities to give to the spending of that money. That is what politics is. And when you're in a coalition, the bigger party does not decide that on its own. And the minister has refused to recognize that fact and has fundamentally undermined the foundations of the coalition and acted contrary to every agreement that we've made up till now.
Conscientiously, and the best of my ability. Conscientiously.